Senate Republicans just voted to surrender their own power to Trump. Because early this morning, you had the Senate narrowly passing a bill that would rescind $9 billion in funding for foreign aid and public broadcasting that Congress itself approved in a bipartisan agreement just a few months ago. And this coming at the request of President Trump, who went through the formal process of submitting what's known as a Recisions Bill to claw back funds that Congress has already greenlit. And I feel like I can't emphasize enough how incredibly significant this is. Rescissions bills are incredibly rare and usually unsuccessful because Congress doesn't want to give up its power over federal spending. In fact, this is the first time in decades that this has happened, which is why you have experts saying this just shows how willing Republicans are to bend to Trump's will as he works to exert control over federal spending, even if it means giving up their own constitutional powers. And just further underscoring how controversial this process is, we saw two Republican Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski joining Democrats to vote against the bill, though it ultimately passed 51-48. You had Murkowski urging Congress to assert its constitutional authorities over federal spending, and both Murkowski and Collins arguing that the Trump administration had failed to provide enough information about exactly which programs would be impacted by the cuts in the legislation. And very notably here, that was also echoed by several other members, including Senators Tom Tillis, Mitch McConnell, and Roger Wicker. Tillis even going as far as to say,
if we find out that some of these programs that we've communicated should be out of bounds, that advisors to the president decide that they're going to cut anyway, then there will be a reckoning for that. I suspect we're going to find out there are some things that we're going to regret, some second and third order effects, and I suspect that when we do, we'll have to come back and fix it.
With then all three of those senators voting for the measure anyway, despite seemingly admitting that they don't know what the bill is going to actually do, which again just further emphasizes how much power Trump wields over the party. Right? Not only will Republicans give up their power of the purse for him, they'll do so without even knowing how exactly he's going to use the power. Now, with that said, while many of the details are unclear, we do know the broad strokes of what the Recisions Bill will do. But the vast majority of the money is going to claw back about $8 billion, which was previously allocated to fund foreign aid programs that the Trump administration says are wasteful. With the New York Times reporting there that the vote codified a number of executive actions the administration advanced earlier this year to gut foreign aid programs, many first undertaken by DOJ. With that, including many of the programs that were previously administered by USAID before Trump and Elon Musk effectively eliminated the agency. So you're looking at things like emergency and disaster relief, food aid, public health, and much more. Though notably here, it's been reported that certain food and global health programs were spared from the cuts, with Republicans stripping the bill of a request that Trump made to cut $400 million to the global AIDS fighting program, PEPFAR, which is estimated to have saved 26 million lives since George W. Bush started it in 2003. So that, it made up the bulk of the cuts, but the remaining $1.1 billion in funds that the Senate voted to rescind was allocated to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB, which funds NPR and PBS. Or with Trump and his Republican allies arguing that the public broadcasters spread so-called woke propaganda and are biased against conservatives. And like the foreign aid cuts, the slashing of public media just codifies executive actions that Trump has already taken. And then with all this, as far as the Democrats, they have condemned the Rescissions Bill, and they kind of hit many of the same arguments that they made with these cuts for months. It's saying that slashing foreign aid is going to result in the loss of millions of lives and weaken American soft power around the globe, claiming that the cuts to public broadcasting is going to disproportionately hurt local public radio stations rather than NPR and PBS. Right, and that because those two broadcasters actually just receive a small percentage of their funding from the federal government. It'll matter, but for many local stations, they get more than half their budgets from the CPB. So those cuts, they could pose an existential threat to many rural stations and risk shutting them down entirely. And that is, you have experts saying that in addition to providing important news and educational services, those broadcasters are vital during emergencies and natural disasters, providing essential life-saving information. Which is why then you have Democrats saying that these cuts will totally destroy many vital services that don't even cost the government that much money in the grand scheme of things. And that is, Democrats have also said that this undermines democracy, right? Arguing that Democrats and Republicans, they agreed to a bipartisan budget bill this spring to fund the government, a move that required 60 votes in the Senate. Now you have Republicans using a tactic that just requires 50 votes in the upper chamber to totally undermine the bipartisan agreement. With that being something that Senator Chris Murphy hit on, and he added,
why would Democrats ever again negotiate a bipartisan budget with Republicans if Republicans 2 months later can just pass a partisan bill that keeps the spending that Republicans like and cuts the spending that Democrats supported in the bipartisan process? So this isn't just really bad policy. This is just another way that Republicans are corroding the rule of law, the institutional norms that have held together our democracy for decades.
Now as far as what happens next, this bill is headed to the House, which has to pass it by Friday under the rules that govern rescissions, though I will say they are widely expected to pass the measure in time.